Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by onlinegreatbooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hambrick, and today I have Miles Marco Bennett with me, and he's the Online Great Books member number one. When I was testing the credit card processing for onlinegreatbooks.com, I ran my credit card and I turned it off. It was on for like 3 minutes, and he ran his card while I had that on. So he was eagerly awaiting our product, and signed him up. And so here we are now. We're going to record a podcast together. He suggested that we should talk about Montaigne.
Montaigne.
Tell them where you're from, Miles.
I am English. I am from Birmingham, England.
So it's Montaigne.
It's Montaigne.
No, listen. You guys say garage, but we know that it's a French word, and we say garage over here in the United States. And the Montaigne's right as well. Right.
Except that we have some kind of respect for the original nature of things. And so,
except for garages, in which case they're garage.
Right, but that's different. Proper nouns. It's a proper noun as opposed to a
common noun.
Right.
So is it Champagne?
The region of France is Champagne, but the drink is champagne, because one is proper and one is common.
So yeah, Montaigne. So I called you up because we talk on Skype all the time. And I said, we should record some podcasts. And first you said, hey, let's read this Francis Bacon. And I read it and I was like, this Bacon ain't so meaty. And then you said this Montaigne on Cannibals. So why that?
Well, Montaigne, because I thought from what I'd read of him, it was kind of meandering and conversational, and there was no part of it that was too much of a deep dive. It was general, and so in reading it could, you could briefly glide over certain topics which seem fitting for podcasts, and then I suppose Cannibals, because it's a good name.
It's a good name, right? Right. I mean, who doesn't want to read about cannibalism? So in Essays Book 1, Montaigne's Essays Book 1, it's chapter 31 on cannibals. And in my edition, I actually read this in the actual Encyclopedia Britannica, Great Books of the Western World. It's the Donald Frame translation. And in mine, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4. It's about 7 pages.
Right.
And I think it's important to say that this guy is right after, he's living in France right after Europeans had discovered the New World. And you can imagine that would be like if we found a new planet and it was occupied with people, right? And so he's hearing, so he talks about conversations that he'd had with some sailors who had been to South America, and he's recounting what they told him about the natives. And when I was reading that, I was thinking, we need to pay attention to this, because he's seeing what it's like to find aliens, really.
Right, discover new peoples.
Yeah, fascinating. A lot of people talk about this thing on Cannibals, and they're really excited about how he doesn't want to judge the cannibals from his own cultural standpoint.
Right.
I didn't find that interesting at all.
I don't even think he says that.
Well, yeah, I mean, sort of. He talks about that they are the way they are as a result of their own culture, and he doesn't condemn it. He doesn't say, as a Frenchman, it doesn't fit in my cuisine as a Frenchman, so they're bad, I mean, that's pretty boring, I think. It's pretty boring to look at somebody's behavior and just say, well, that's the way they do it. I have nothing to say. It's neither here nor there to me. But it was interesting to me to see how worldly Montaigne was. he talks about, he drops names all over. He quotes from Plato, Virgil, Zeno, Seneca, Aristotle, Juvenal.
Propertius.
Yeah, so many. And right off the bat, he talks about that he understands that the continents move too.
Right.
I saw that.
Yeah, and he compares it to a river. And though he doesn't believe in Atlantis, he does see the fact that the Americas are a new land.
Yeah. Did he, when I read that, I only read this once. I probably should have read it again. But you're like, we have to do a taster podcast right away or I won't go to bed. So did he say that he doesn't believe in Atlantis?
He said that he'd seen no evidence for it.
Yeah, he talks about Plato describing Atlantis as this giant continent that was in the western part of the Mediterranean, and of course is no longer. And he doesn't really say it out loud, but I couldn't help but think that he was saying, well, maybe this was Atlantis.
Right. I think we've got to go back to the cultural relativism.
Okay, go.
I think that's the most interesting thing.
Boring. Go ahead.
No, because that's not what he says. He doesn't say, I can't condemn it because it's not my own culture. He actually says that in many ways it's better than my own culture. So he compares it to Plato's Republic, and he says in this that in Plato's Republic there are all these kind of products of artifice. He talks about how the Greeks have this concept of the barbarian, and the Greeks, of course, are not barbarians. And what makes barbarians barbarous is that they, I believe he quotes, have been fashioned very little by the human mind. So, he talks about how the Greeks would consider anyone other than Greeks barbarians because they don't use rhetoric, and they don't have a judiciary, and they don't have a system of governance. And he says that Plato's Republic is a product of artifice, that it's Plato from this high-minded position trying to reason into reality some kind of ideal society. Whereas he seems to believe that an ideal society would be naturally emergent and that one couldn't reason one into existence.
Yeah, he says, he says here in my version, he says, I should say to Plato, in which there is a nation, I should say to Plato, in which there is no sort of traffic, no knowledge of letters, no science of numbers, no name for a magistrate or for political superiority, no custom of servitude, no riches or poverty, no contracts. This is some real hippy-dippy shit. No contracts, no secessions, no partitions, no occupations, but leisure ones. No care for any but common kinship, no clothes, no agriculture, no metal, no use of wine or wheat. The very words that signify lying, treachery, dissimulation, avarice, envy, belittling, pardon, unheard of. How far from this perfection would he find the republic that he imagined? Well, Plato doesn't hold any of those things up to be good, but Montaigne is. He's like, oh, it'd be wonderful.
What would be wonderful?
Well, if he thinks that, well, I don't know if he says it's wonderful, but he says that there's a naturalness so pure and simple there. And then he goes on to describe a nation with no traffic, no knowledge of letters, no science of numbers, no name, no lying, no treachery, no dissimulation, etc.
And a village by the sea.
Right, a village by the sea. But then, so this emergent society that's not this artifice is what he sees that that's what he believes these sailors are describing to him who had been to the New World.
Right.
But then he talks about the only things that they value are their drink, their women, and then go into war.
Right. Well, yes, but the war's defensive, right? That's something he says, that the only war they conduct is defensive.
I didn't see that. It was about valor. They only go to war Their warfare is wholly noble and generous, and as excusable and beautiful as this human disease can be. That's a nice turn of phrase, by the way.
Right.
Its only basis among them is their rivalry in valor. They're not fighting for the conquest of new lands, for they still enjoy that natural abundance that provides them without toil and trouble, with all necessary things in such profusion they have no wish to enlarge their boundaries. They only go to show how valorous and brave they are. They only go to war for that. Is that not your reading?
I thought that the line preceding that, if their neighbors cross the mountains to attack them and win a victory, the gain of the victor is glory and the advantage of having proved them master in valor and virtue.
Yeah, valor and virtue and daring, and that's it.
But if their neighbors cross their mountains to attack them, right?
Yeah, but it ain't about boundaries. It's just, they had to cross the mountains to get there.
Wait, not bound. I thought they weren't going external to war, but only fighting wars brought to them internally.
That could be. That's true. And they say that they have no use for the goods of the vanquished and just return to their own country. And then I like this, though. They return to their own country where they lack neither anything necessary nor that great thing, the knowledge of how to enjoy their condition happily and be content with it.
Right.
Yeah, that'd be good to have that knowledge of condition, how to enjoy the condition happily and be content with it.
Right.
They demand
not ever growing.
Yeah, Plato talks about that in the Republic. If you don't live simply, it requires more land and requires more and more division of labor, which requires more and more land.
Now you're no longer just growing turnips, you're paying someone to grow turnips while you fit windows.
And the next thing you know, you've got to go beat your neighbors up and take more land so that you can grow turnips for the non-agricultural workers. Yeah, that simple living for Plato was, or for Socrates in the Republic, was the foundation of a peaceful, non-militaristic life.
Right. In this, earlier on, he speaks of these men who, because they're knowledgeable in one single subject, they're knowledgeable in all of them, and speak in all of them. And yeah, he speaks of this guy who knows much of rivers, but nothing about as much of anything as anyone else. And says that often these kind of subject matter experts like to opine on things that they don't know anything about merely because they have knowledge in one area. That's just true.
Yeah. In that section is where he was. I wrote it down here. In my notes, it says the common guy is a better witness.
Right.
Yeah. 'Cause he to follow that up, he's like, but I got these common sailors that really don't know anything, have no baggage, and they're telling me what they saw of these native people in South America, and don't think their testimony isn't good because the experts' testimony is no good.
Right. Yeah. Because the experts try to apply some kind of either exaggeration or leaning to whatever they speak of. The evidence isn't just evidence; it's evidence with flair.
I think this is one of the reasons why Montaigne is continued to be so popular, is that section, actually. He says, this man I had was a simple, crude fellow, a character fit to be true witness. For clever people observe more things and more curiously, but they interpret them. And to lend weight and conviction to their interpretation, they cannot help altering history a little. They never show you things as they are, but bend and disguise them according to the way they have seen them, and to give credence to their judgment and attract you to it. They're prone to add something to their matter, to stretch it and amplify it. We need a man either very honest or so simple that he has not the stuff to build up false inventions and give them plausibility, and is wedded to no theory. Such was my man. And besides this, he at various times brought sailors and merchants whom he had known on that trip to see me. So I content myself with this information without inquiring what the cosmographers may say about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, apply that to society. Like, applying no artifice.
Like the media.
Right.
Yeah, or really anybody. Well, like, what about us talking about this book?
Right.
No, I mean,
What about
really,
us
what
talking about this book?
I don't know. We're bringing some sort of shit to it.
Sure. People think this is us talking honestly and neutrally, but really we're just trying to apply whatever we think to it. Lean them.
And I'm trying to make a show out of this. Like, a podcast.
Right.
Hopefully it'll be something that somebody will want to read or listen to. And then hopefully after they've listened to this, they'll want to maybe join us at Online Great Books. I mean, so I'm going to warp and alter this history a little, like Montaigne says in here. Yeah, I always like it when I got a soft spot for the common man, because we all are, even when we think we're uncommon, we're probably not. And so when anybody says something like that, I think that's glorious. I really do. He trusts that guy. He trusts
Right.
that guy.
I think he kind of says that you can't not trust him. He's not able to say anything more.
Yeah.
He's not able to put a spin on it, so you have to trust him because it's all he could be doing.
Do you know anybody that's like this so simple? Like he says that this guy is, he's so simple that he has not the stuff to build up false inventions and give them plausibility. Do you know anybody that's so simple that they can't lie?
Right. There's no rhetoric. It's just plain speak.
Yeah. Do you know any of those? I know a few.
No.
I know a
Not
few.
one.
Not one?
Nah.
Yeah.
No.
You guys have killed all of them back in the Tudor era.
Those people just don't speak here.
Yeah, country folk here, and he says simple. He doesn't say stupid. They just say the thing on their mind.
What's the distinction?
What does he say here? They're so simple that he has not the stuff to build up false inventions and give them plausibility. I mean, when he says he has not the stuff,
I took that to be capacity of mind.
Well, he's just talking about how people that observe things, but then they give you their interpretation and alter it to fit their account. And this guy has no axe to grind. He has no other ethnographical work that he has to shore up. He's just like, man,
right.
I got off the boat and there were these people and they were eating each other. Like he just has nothing else to say about it except what he saw. That's the way I read that.
We should get to the eating each other.
It is about cannibalism, after all.
Right. And
actually, wait a minute. Is this about cannibalism?
I don't know, or is it just kind of a conversational tone? And the Montaigne likes talking.
For sure.
And he has many things to say about many different things. And whether it's about anything or whether it's just the subject matter he's picked to talk about whatever he wants to talk about is another matter. Like in here, we've got him talking about the man who thinks he knows everything because he knows something. And we've got him talking about the
Republic.
The Republic.
I just saw another line. I got to interrupt you. So he just runs Plato through on this. He says, all our efforts cannot even succeed in reproducing the nest of the tiniest little bird, its contexture, its beauty, its convenience, or even the web of the puny spider. All things, says Plato, are produced by nature, by fortune, or by art. The greatest and most beautiful by one or the other of the first two, the least and most imperfect by the last. So nature and fortune make the best stuff, art the worst stuff. So that's where he goes on to impugn the Republic as artifice, as art.
Right.
Yeah, and so these are people of nature. Like these people that the sailors saw when they got off the boat are people of nature.
Is there a distinction there, though?
I think so. I mean, if somebody goes to 15,000 hours of schooling at their government school and watches however much television or other media and passively takes this stuff in, right? It's not education or experience born of interacting with reality.
Right.
And then they go to university and they spend however long there, and then they go sit in a cubicle for however long. Like how much of a product of nature is that person? And how much of a product of artifice is that person?
Right. I was thinking more along the lines of, both of these societies are formed by their environment. It's just one's further along, right?
further along, what positivist shit is that?
Right.
He has a lot to say in praise. I mean, like apparently you do. Their society says they live in a country. There's a pleasant and temperate climate. You don't see sick people. You don't see toothless people. They live in long house. We would call them long houses here. Big old buildings that hold 200 or 300 people.
Polygamous.
They're polygamous.
5 wives.
Like in the Republic, all the people that are about the same age call each other brother and sister.
Right. And anyone younger is a child and anyone older is an elder.
Yeah. And their drink is made of some root, and it is of the color of our claret wines. They drink it only lukewarm. It keeps only 2 or 3 days, has a slightly sharp taste, is not at all heady, is good for the stomach, and has a laxative effect upon those who are not used to it. But he says, I have tried it. It tastes sweet and a little flat. How would he have tried it?
Right.
I almost called BS there.
Right.
And their whole day is spent in dancing. Their whole ethical science contains only these 2 articles: resoluteness in war and affection for their wives. That ain't bad.
No. I think his jib with Plato is that he's not talking about the Greeks. Plato's talking about the Greeks.
Right.
These aren't the Greeks.
No.
And in that, the standards of the Greeks might be perfectly fine standards to hold the Greeks to, but these aren't the Greeks.
Right.
They're not. And to ascribe these kind of grander values of a judiciary system to a state that lives in a commune.
Yeah.
And it's a temperate climate. And so food is readily accessible, and they don't suffer for anything. And yet you're talking about creating these almost unnecessary, that it's products of a colder climate. These colder climates where things are harder to produce and it's harder to live through winter. And suddenly you've got a state that requires a judiciary and property laws and an agricultural system, because you can't live off the land. But a state where you can, and you have an almost infinite supply of food.
Yeah, you're right. He says that he attributes this to their very pleasant and temperate climate, he says. And because they have such plenty, and they can live with so little artifice and human solder, he says, that they are as men fresh sprung from the gods.
Right.
That's awesome. Isn't that what we all want?
Right. And this kind of simple living, I think in this sense he's right. If would Plato's Republic be better for these people than the lives they're already living?
Ugh. Well, it depends. How bad is cannibalism?
They don't cannibalize their own.
Well,
did you read that? It's only those in warfare.
I did. But
it's only their enemies in warfare.
Well, but how bad is it?
Bad in what sense?
I don't know.
On the effects of the citizens.
Right.
I don't think so. I think it's fine. I think they think.
I agree.
They think it's entirely just.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So when they capture somebody in warfare, and it seemed like they were captured, right? It wasn't that they killed a guy in combat and then ate him.
Oh no, because they
had to
cut him up part by part.
They had to taunt him with it. Hey, look, Bubba, we're fixing to eat you.
Right. And they didn't just eat him. They didn't kill him and eat him. They cooked him, and then they cut him up into little pieces, and they ate them piece by piece. And I believe he says they do it while they're still alive. So it's not some kind of humanitarian cannibalism. And it's not for the cannibalism itself. Because
he says he thinks there's no more barbarity in eating a man alive than in eating him dead. And there's no more barbarity in that in tearing by tortures and the rack a body still full of feeling, which is what they're doing all the time.
And he says that they're not doing he puts to rest this idea that they're doing it for food or nourishment or anything like that. He says that they saw that the Portuguese would bury a man up to his neck and then shoot arrows into him. And once they heard about this, they adopted that instead because it was more barbaric.
Right.
But I think this is perfectly moral.
Yeah, he says he doesn't see anything worse about eating these people alive than breaking them on the rack, or in having him bitten and mangled by dogs and swine, as we have not only read, but seen within fresh memory, not among ancient enemies, but among neighbors and fellow citizens, and what is worse, on the pretext of piety and religion. So if he's to be believed, like he's seen people turn the dogs and the hogs loose on, I guess, heretics, like in his lifetime. To be
so, is he being a boring moderate, or is he? Is he?
I don't think so. This would have been fairly revolutionary, I think, to say, he says on the pretext of piety and religion, these people were mauled by dogs and pigs.
Right.
So, for him to say that just eating people is better than that might get you mauled by a dog.
Dogs and pig.
They might have turned him into pig food if this had gotten out, maybe. I don't know. And then he says, physicians do not fear to use human flesh in all sorts of ways for our health, applying it either inwardly or outwardly. Yeah, medicine was barbaric at that time, So he likens the physicians even to these cannibals.
He also says that if these cannibals are ever captured, unlike their enemies, they never falter. They're entirely loyal until their dying breath. And he reckons that the glory in victory is not the victory itself, but effectively dying with a fight. And he says that once captured and they threaten to kill him, the cannibals will then bring up the fact that their body consists of the former cannibalized remains of their own peoples.
Right. Yeah. You eat me, you're snacking on granddad because
right.
My dad ate him. Yeah.
It's good rhetoric.
He says that the cannibals would capture someone in warfare and they would keep them around and treat them very well, wine them and dine them, all the while letting them know, hey, we're gonna eat you in a little while.
Just taunting them.
Yeah. They're treating them very well, other than the threat of the meal later.
Mm.
But the only thing they demanded of their prisoners, they demanded of their prisoners no other ransom that they confess and acknowledge their defeat. So I read that line. So if a guy's like, yep, you beat me, completely beat me in warfare, would they have let him go? That wasn't clear to me. Did you see that?
Wait, say again.
He says in the paragraph before the Claudian quote. So there's the Juvenal quote and the Claudian quote.
Proprietus Virgil, Juvenal. Got it. Claudian.
In the paragraph ahead of that one, he says, they demand of their prisoners no other ransom than that they confess and acknowledge their defeat. But there is not one in a whole century who does not choose to die rather than relax a single bit by word or look from the grandeur of invincible courage. Not one who would not rather be killed and eaten than so much as to ask not to be.
Right.
They treat them all the freely so that life may be all the dearer to them, and usually entertain them with threats of their coming death. But not once in a century has someone asked to not be eaten.
Right.
Do we believe this?
Do we need to? I mean, if all history is men putting spins, we can just take this as Montaigne's spin. It's fine. Sound. You know.
Yeah, it's good enough fodder for thought, right? I guess.
Right. I mean, if this is just a means of him ascribing the virtues of cannibals, whether they exist or not, while simultaneously talking about Plato. Does it matter if the cannibals exist, as long as Montaigne thinks they're moral?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, the conversation's still good. If he said, let's imagine that there were cannibals in South America and this is how they acted, that'd be good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, he talks about in their warfare, they're so proud of their accomplishments in warfare, but their accomplishments are all about who has sturdier arms and legs.
Right.
About the stroke of luck that makes the enemy stumble or dazzles his eyes by sunlight. And he seemed to think that their tests of valor were more noble than those of the Europeans. But he who falls obstinate in his courage, if he has fallen, he fights on his knees. He who relaxes none of his assurance, no matter how great the danger of imminent death, who, giving up his soul, still looks firmly and scornfully at his enemy. He is beaten not by us, but by fortune. He is killed, not conquered. He's talking about these natives. I think that's great. The most valiant are sometimes the most unfortunate. Thus there are triumphant defeats that rival victories. Nor did those 4 sister victories, the fairest that the sun ever set eyes on, Salamis, Plataea, I don't know this, Michel, I don't know, and Sicily, ever dare match all their combined glory against the glory of the annihilation of King Leonidas and his men at the pass of Thermopylae. Sure.
It's to act virtuously in the face of defeat.
It's just virtuously. It ain't right. It ain't the winning or the losing for him.
I mean, he talked latterly about this tribe's religion, and he says that the way the price of being a priest is if you get anything wrong, any prediction wrong.
I love it.
They'll kill him straight up. Do they eat them?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, they said if you're a prognosticator and the first time you're wrong, you're out.
Right. Divination is a gift of God. This is why its abuse should be punished as imposture. When the soothsayers failed to hit the mark, they were laid, chained, hand and foot, on carts full of heather and drawn by oxen, on which they were burned.
Those who handle matters subject to the control of human capacity are excusable if they do the best they can. But these others who come and trick us with assurances of an extraordinary faculty that is beyond our ken, should they not be punished for not making good their promise and for the temerity of their imposture? I love that.
Right.
I love that.
If you ascribe the voice of God to yourself, then when it turns out that you're lying, you should face death.
This made me think of political commentators who are wrong about every single thing they prognosticate about.
Right.
I'm thinking Bill Kristol right now. The guy's wrong about everything he guesses about. And but he still gets to go write newspaper articles and I think he has a blue check mark on Twitter, and the guy's a hoax.
Right. I mean, you're talking outside my cultural remit here.
I'm sure you've got somebody there that
someone akin to him.
Yeah, it's everything that they say is just wrong.
Right.
Everything, and I'm not even making a political judgment here. I mean, the guy makes predictions publicly all the time. There are people that do this about the stock market. They make predictions publicly every day or weekly, whatever. And I kind of like the idea. Let's draw them and quarter them. Let's put them on a cart full of heather, burn them. Sounds good. Sounds good. So at the end of the story, he says that some of these adventurers had brought a couple of these cannibals back to France. And this is awesome storytelling, Miles. He says those cannibals, they told him 3 things. He's like, I remember the first 2. I forgot the third one.
Right.
That's great. Leave it hanging. But he said the first one was that they had seen King Charles IX, who was a young king at the time, and So these cannibals had seen him, and he was surrounded by the Swiss guard, big burly military guys, and they're like, well, why doesn't one of those guys take over? Seems fair. And the other one is that they had seen beggars in the street, and he said, they noticed that there were among us men full and gorged with all sorts of good things, and that their other halves were beggars at their doors, emaciated with hunger and poverty, and that they thought it was strange that these needy halves could endure such an injustice and did not take the others by the throat or set fire to their houses.
Right.
Yeah, so if you came to, I can imagine, 14th century France, and you saw those things with clean eyes, and you wouldn't, there's a 12-year-old that everybody's deferring to, and there are all these military men. One of the military men is clearly in charge of all the other military men. You'd wonder why the hell they were talking to the kid. And the same thing about the hungry. It's fantastic. And then he wraps up this essay after talking about cannibals and sailors and their long voyages and politics and all that stuff. And then he talks about what it's like to be one of these cannibal kings. And how well they're treated, and he said that he commanded 4,000 or 5,000 men, and then when he went into villages as a visitor, they made paths for him through the underbrush by which he might pass comfortably. So he was a man of means and respect. And Montaigne says, all this is not too bad, but what's the use? They don't wear breeches.
Right.
He's funny. He's interesting, and he's funny, and he's got a lot of good stuff packed in 7 or 8 pages here, man. I love it.
I think there's a conversational tone to it all, and it allows for just meandering thought. He's talking about cannibals, but he's not. He's talking about everything else. Yeah, and that's great.
I know a few people that are bright, and everything they know touches everything else they know. And so when they talk about, Mark Ripito is one of those, when he talks about cooking or weight training or anything,
septic tanks,
whatever it is, he brings everything he knows about everything else he knows to bear on that thing. And I think he does it in an honest way, unlike, he talks about the dishonest witness Montaigne does early in this essay. I'm not talking about that. I don't think, let me stop there. Montaigne brings a great deal of what he knows to bear on what he saw and what he knew of these cannibals, but I don't know that he's warping his account of them to fit what he sees. I think he seems to be an honest observer, an honest commenter, as much as he can.
When Rip talks about septic tanks, he's not doing it as a subject matter expert. He's an expert. He knows a lot about a lot, and that's the difference.
Yeah, the dishonest witness that Montaigne talks about knows one thing well and thinks that he understands everything else as well as that.
Right, and all that subject matter knowledge transfers exactly and reproducibly to everything else. So as Rip knows 100 things, 1,000 things about 1,000 things, and so everything he says is right.
That's a little much. The hagiography of Mark Ripito. Well, there's Montaigne. That's fun. What are we going to do next?
I was going to say more Montaigne, but okay. How about Blaise Cendrars?
Who? What?
Blaise Cendrars.
I don't know anything about this.
It's an autobiography of a First World War veteran in the Front Legion. And he's just a crazy guy. Henry Miller references him as his favorite author. So I thought you'd love it.
Henry Miller's rubbish, but I might like the book.
Sound.
Well, Montaigne, we read Montaigne in our program. Whether you do this stuff with us or not, go get that. Montaigne's essays. It's good bathroom reading, right? Like, it's all little short essays on all kinds of subject matter. There's So he writes a lot. I don't think this Montaigne is something that you would want to read cover to cover necessarily, but here's a little smattering of things that he covers. Of idleness, of liars, of not communicating one's glory, of names, on the vanity of words. One man's profit is another man's harm. Of pedantry, of the education of children. I want to do that one with you. On drunkenness, on the resemblance of children of their fathers, of repentance, of coaches, of vanity, of cripples, of physiognomy. We got to read that. You see that one? Book 3, chapter 12?
Physiognomy.
Yeah.
Is this 29 essays you've got? What is this you've got?
I've got the complete Montaigne. How dare you?
I do not. I'm lacking. I have 29 of them.
So, all kinds of various and sundry stuff. He is the people's philosopher, I think. I think he thumbs his nose at those who think they know, is what he seems to do. An interesting guy. There's another podcast. Go to iTunes and give us a 5-star review. We need that to help maybe drive us up in the rankings and get some more listeners, so we can get more people interested in these good books, and maybe we can get them the heck away from Game of Thrones and what other Marvel superhero movies.
Right.
Something, the heroes in these books don't have superpowers. They're just
regular folk.
They're regular folk. They're virtuous heroes. Thanks for listening.